Hello everyone! So, 2022 is almost over and boy did Wizards dump a ton of new cards on us. So, I probably can't cover all of the best cards of 2022, but I did put a list of my top performers. And to spice it up a little bit, I ordered them based on how much they overperformed. In other words, how surprised was I about the performance of that card. And it turns out there are quite some surprises there. So, alright, without further ado, let's head right into it. So, at the 20th place, we got Awaken the Woods from the recent set, Brothers Wars. So, no big surprises here. It's a very strong card. I think everyone agrees. And I've talked about how bonkers this card is in a couple of my recent videos. So, in summary, this can just be a good old simple ramp at potentially very good rate once you get to X equals 3 or more. But it can also be a total bomb when played in a landfall or token stack. So moving along, at the 19th place, we got the Channel Lance from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So this is not a single card, but a set of cards from the same cycle. And you probably already know the mega staple, which is Boseiju. And yeah, it's used everywhere. It's a very strong card. No big surprise there. However, some of the other ones are really good too. For example, Otawara. Otawara is actually really good. Especially because it doesn't only let you bounce your opponent's stuff, it can also bounce your own stuff at a potentially very cheap cost. And Takenuma also deserves so much more attention, I think. Getting back a creature to hand from graveyard at instant speed, I think that's so good. And finally, I cannot believe how many times a Ganju just kills my opponent commander and they're like, just what? Anyway, moving on. Next, in the 18th position, we got Grand Crescendo. So this is pretty much secure the waste, but it also gives indestructibility for an extra white pip. It's just so good. So if needed, this can simply save your creature from a board wipe. You don't even need to make creature tokens. Or you can make tokens just before your turn, so you can attack with them on your turn. So it's not, people cannot see it coming. Or you can also have a bunch of indestructible blockers to really swing the game. It really messes with your opponent's attack once you put a bunch of indestructible 1/1s on the field. Next, in the 17th position, we got Biotransference. While black hasn't been the artifact color before 40k came out, this card really gives black an oomph as a newcomer in the artifact archetype. And artifacts are so prevalent in EDH, and it enables so many synergies, so making all your other stuff also artifacts amplifies that effect by a lot. For example, now you imagine you can copy anything with Sculpting Steel, not just artifacts. And the other thing is that the second ability is also super relevant and really feeds into black's identity. While yes, it can create an army of token eventually, it probably more often be more efficient as a sack fodder. And since the tokens are both artifact and creature, they can serve as both artifact or creature fodder. So yeah, it does a lot of work. So next, in the 16th place, we got Ledger Shredder. Oh my god, it's so hard to say this all the time. So this simple looking bird has many people deceived when it first came out. It really didn't look exciting, and it's probably still not that exciting. But it's just a very strong card for a 2-drop. So with 4 players, there's plenty of opportunities for Connive to trigger. This means card selection throughout the game. And as a bonus, it just grows bigger as the game goes on. And did I mention flyer? Yes. So eventually this will become a very problematic beater. And just the base stats alone of 1 power and 3 toughness makes it actually a very solid blocker in the very early game. So this is just an overall solid card. Not super exciting in any ways, but just very good. And next, in the 15th place, we got Haywire Mite. So this is another of a seemingly boring thing, but boy, is it good at what it does. So 2 mana to exile a problematic artifact or enchantment, and it has to be non-creature. Still, this is really, really good. And you can even split the cost since it is 1 to cast and 1 to activate. And then the card is actually, it's both a creature and an artifact. So it works well with both creature and artifact recursion, whichever your deck has. And usually, most decks has one or the other in some form. And in the 14th place, we got Battle Angels of Tyr. So given its stats alone, 4 mana for a 4/4 flyer with Myriad? Wow, talking about power creep, am I right? But yeah, given the stats alone, I think we all know this is gonna be a pretty good card. It's a very solid beater that will try hit everyone for 4 in the air every single turn. So combat-wise, it's super hard to kill, because there's usually always at least one person without any blockers in the air. So getting in is usually no problem at all. And then of course, there's the damage trigger, which can potentially gain you a lot of value. So I wasn't so sure about this at first, whether they will trigger at all, and whether the value is any good or not, and so on. But after actually playing it a bunch of time in multiple decks, it always feels good, because oftentimes it gives you the most fundamental resource in Magic, which is either drawing cards or mana from treasure. The life gain is also nice, but yeah, that's just a bonus. And coming in number 13 is Tocasia's Welcome. This is a recent addition from Brothers Wars. So at the first glance, this is just another welcoming vampire with the same sort of very safe restriction of only triggering once per turn. Kind of boring, isn't it? But oh boy, this plays, like when you actually play it, it's so much better. And don't get me wrong, welcoming vampire is also super sweet, but I think this is just a step up at what it's trying to do. So yes, it's not a beater or a blocker in the air, but it's an enchantment, which in a way is better because it will be harder to remove. And their trigger conditions might look very similar at first, but triggering on CMC is way better in most scenarios, especially in white. So first to note is that this gets triggered by any generic tokens, even those big 4/4 angel tokens that are very common in white. On the other hand, welcoming vampire won't trigger in this case. And then there's also the case where all your tiny creatures are no longer 1/1s or 2/2s, but bigger because of all the anthem effects. So in this case, Tocasias will still trigger as long as their CMC is pretty small, but it won't trigger for welcoming vampire. And in the 12th place, we got Saw in Half from Infinity. Alright, so I wasn't the biggest fan of Infinity, but I think I've grown to be more okay of it now. And one of my favorites is actually Saw in Half. And probably mainly because no stickers. It doesn't do the stickers thing. It just gives you value. So underneath all the flavorful funsies that this card does, performing a sadistic Mad Max-like act of cutting creatures into half, this card is actually a mega value card. So when you boil it down, what this card gives us is 50% of the original creature's power, 50% of its toughness, 3 death triggers, and 2 ETB triggers of a single creature, and putting that creature in the graveyard for more shenanigans. So that part is pretty relevant too. So I've tried it in my baby Kaalia deck, and it was perfect. Because my Kaalia deck plays around both ETB and death triggers a lot, so this just provides me with so many value. For example, if you do this to Junji, and you will eventually get 3 death triggers, allowing you to reanimate 3 non-dragon creatures. Or just destroy your opponent's hands, that works too. And with Angel of Ruins, for example, you'll be able to exile a total of 6 artifacts or enchantments, including the original trigger from the original creature. And finally, if you want to finish a game, what can be nastier than getting 3 Kokusho death triggers? Opponent will lose a total of 15 life each, and you'll gain 45. That's just backbreaking. Moving on to number 11, an offer you cannot refuse. So, I think at first there was a bit of, is it worth giving opponent 2 treasures? That seems like a lot and doesn't seem that great. But I think at this point we can safely say it's almost always great. Paying a single blue and giving someone 2 treasures to stop their backbreaking spell is simply amazing. There's really not much else to say there. Like only needing to leave up 1 mana versus 2 mana for, say, negate is huge. Every single mana cost matters a lot when playing counter magic. So it means you can play your threat 1 turn earlier while still leaving up mana for a counter spell. Swansong is probably still slightly above this, but it's close. Alright, now we're moving into the top 10. At the 10th place, we got Professional Facebreaker. What a funny name, huh? So, this card is just Value Town. Alright, let's start with the combat stuff first. It has Menace, so it can easily get in there itself in the early game. And that allows it to trigger its own ability. And with plenty of other creatures or some form of evasions, getting 2 to 3 treasures from its ability is not hard to achieve. And this is some serious gas. And as a bonus, it's also a card advantage engine which feeds off its own treasure production. So if you're generating all that treasure but got nothing to cast, hey, no problem. So, as always, if you have a mana plus card advantage in a single card, it's usually pretty bonkers. If it doesn't pulls you ahead of the game, it will always unstuck you by providing you mana and cards, which are, again, the 2 fundamental resources in Magic. Moving to number 9. At the 9th position, we got Sardian Avenger, again, from the newest latest set, Brothers Wars. Oh boy, this is definitely one of my favorite from this entire list. It at first kind of feels a bit pushed maybe, but hey, it's probably nothing compared to all other recent broken cards. Yes, I'm talking about that other goblin. In a way, this card actually feels like a way of Wizards saying, okay, we messed up with Dockside, we'll give you some fun combat goblin as a compensation. So, anyway, this is a 2-drop that scales as the game progresses. Its power grows the more artifact your opponent has. I wonder, what format is swamped with a lot of artifacts all the time? Oh hey, it's Commander. Problem solved. But only having that big power would mean nothing without the 2 magical keywords it comes with. First Strike and Trample. Scary keywords when combined together. Not only can this card dominate early game with First Strike, it will absolutely punch through with Trample later in the game. And I appreciate they designed this to work with a lot of red evasion effects. I'm talking about its low base power, which only gets big when it attacks. This allows you to easily make it unblockable with cards like Sabiri, Pathmaker Initiate, Break Through the Line, Access Tunnel, and so on and so on. And since it gets power in attack triggers, this card is also absurd with multiple combat since the power buff is... it will retain its buff power from the previous combat, so it keeps getting bigger with each extra combat. And if being a combat monster is not enough, it also hates on artifact. It makes the players with all those artifact graveyard shenanigans needing to think twice, or the Sardian Avenger will ping them to death. Yes, and if their shenanigans go infinite, well, Sardian Avenger will simply not allow it, because it will kill them. Okay, there's obviously a downside here that it only has 1 toughness, which makes it easily die from any collateral damage, but hey, whatever, it only costs 2 mana. It's fine. In the 8th place, we got Vivien of the Hunt. So at first I wasn't sure if Vivien was good enough for 6 mana. It does feel very expensive, despite having the ability to pot away creatures, which is one of the strongest effects in Magic. But soon after playing it, I was convinced of how good it is. As you probably know, the main challenge of playing Planeswalker in EDH is that people can easily attack and kill them. So, in case you don't have blockers out though, Vivien can make her own respectable 4/4 Rhinos for a -1 loyalty cost. This is not the ideal scenario, but when needed, she can protect herself to some extent. And furthermore, if you do have some sort of token synergy, this is even better, right? For example, I play her in OG Trostani, and when I don't have anything good to populate, hey, 4/4 Rhinos aren't the worst. And so if making a Rhino is her -1, her pot ability must be like -2 loyalty or something, right? Nope. The pot ability is actually +2, which I think is insane. If you can keep generating value by potting creatures and keeping Vivien alive, it can get scary very fast for your opponents. And then her last ability is the +1, which is also pretty good. It's sort of a pseudo draw up to 5 cards, depending how many creatures you get and how much you can utilize your graveyard. This can come in handy, but most of the time I'm always +2ing her for potting my creatures. And of course, she can also be used for winning combo lines, but even just playing her for pure value is amazing. At number 7, we have Karlach, Fury of Avernus. So this card has easily become my favorite extra combat card, overtaking even Combat Celebrant, which I really liked. Yes, it costs 5. However, in practice, it's only 1 turn behind Combat Celebrant, since Karlach doesn't actually need to attack to give you the extra combat. As long as you're attacking, boom, you get an extra combat. That's it. And giving extra combat as soon as she drops also adds the element of surprise. Without haste, everyone will see Combat Celebrant's extra combat coming, right? But with Karlach, drop her and boom, extra combat. They didn't see it coming. And that's all nice, but one of my favorite part of Karlach that is often so overlooked is that she gives first strike to your attacking creatures, which makes attacking so much easier and makes life so much harder for all your opponents. And finally, this is probably irrelevant to 99% of you, but I once played a game of Two-Headed Giant, and you know what? Karlach actually says untap all attacking creature, not just yours. So our entire team got to attack again, and they all gained first strike. So if you're playing Two-Headed Giants, remember that. And also, oh my god, I love her art so much. She looks so badass. Moving along, in the 6th place, we got Celestine, the Living Saint. So being a 5-drop, I was only cautiously excited about this card at the beginning, but boy, was I wrong. It comes with an okay body, it has evasion, and enables itself given it has lifelink. Being able to trigger itself is probably what makes this card awesome. You don't necessarily have to play it in decks that's focused on life gain. Also, this triggers on end step, so you can immediately reap some value. You'll either need some way to gain life, perhaps another lifelinker, or if you can give Celestine haste, she got lifelink as well. I also like that there's no cap on how big of a creature you can get back. Sure, if you only rely on Celestine's lifelink, you'll probably get a 3-drop at best, but if you have other ways of gaining life, you can get back huge scary things. And this card is really always fantastic in the mid to late game. My favorite target that's also on this list? Haywire Mite. This little mite will keep coming back, exiling all those pesky enchantments and artifacts. It's just amazing. Alright, we're entering the top 5 of my top performers. Alright, at the 5th place, we got Black Market Connections. I think a lot of people actually underrated this card at first. There was a number of opinions floating around that losing that much life every turn is just not sustainable and not worth it. However, I think probably at this point everyone is more or less on agreement that this is a very strong card in EDH. This is probably reflected in the most simple way by how pricey it has gotten. It's around what, $30-$35 now? Boy. So, yeah, the core of this card is that it can almost always gives you whatever you need. Cards and mana, again, are fundamental resources in Magic, so getting those are always gas, especially when you're short of either of them. And at the cost of 3 life, that's just amazing. And you get to do you get to do this after your draw. I think this is actually a big part too. So you can choose accordingly based on what you need. You can see what you drew and then figure out, oh, do I need an extra treasure? Do I want another card or what? And then there's the third mode, which yes, has a steeper cost at 3 life, but boy, this doesn't just give you anybody. It's not those fragile 1/1s. This one is a 3/2. Furthermore, it's a changeling. So if you are playing any tribal, this will just freely synergize this automatically. And since Black Market Connection is in black could easily take advantage of a sack fodder, converting it into other types of values, which gives that changeling even more value. And yeah, this always plays better than it looks on paper. And the longer it just sits around, the more insane value you get out of it in the long run. Next, in the 4th place, we got Scepter of Eternal Glory. So, this is another one of those cards that people seem to underestimate a lot when it was first spoiled, mostly comparing it to Thran Dynamo. Some even arguing that is the worst Thran Dynamo due to the conditional for producing 3-colored mana. But I found this to simply work amazing in my monocolored decks. Turning it on has almost never been a problem. Though it is worth noting that I am being cautious about how many non-basics I'm running. And having this over Thran Dynamo just makes it so much easier to cast multiple spells with 1 to 2 colored pips. Casting this by turn 4 or turn 5 just produces so much momentum the next turn. And since this taps for 3, you're really only down 1 mana the turn you cast it. So it is worth noting that unlike Thran Dynamo, this is legendary, so copying shenanigans might not work. But that's the downside I take any day. Alright, heading into the top 3, and before I go into the top 3 here, which might surprises you, I want to remind you that I put this list together and ordering it based on what surprised me the most. So yes, they're all my top performers, but the higher we go, the more I was surprised by how well they performed. So, coming in number 3 is Nalfashni. Alright, again, you might not be expecting this, but remember, we're ranking based on how much the card overperforms. At least from my perspective. So while a 4/6 flyer might feel very underwhelming, I think it's a good enough and pretty impressive buddy given the ability that comes with it. So you get an unconditional spell copy whenever you cast a spell from exile. So yes, your deck or strategy must revolve around casting spells from exile. But if you do, Nalfashni becomes a very, very scary value engine. And people often underestimate it. So I should mention that permanents copied by it won't stick around. But that's not always bad since you get to sacrifice it. Remember, you get to sacrifice it, not exile. So you do have to sacrifice the copy permanent on the end step. The copied permanent does get haste though. So you'll be able to get the complete ETB, attack, and potential combat damage to player and death trigger. The whole package. A card similar to this, I think it's probably Jin-Gitaxias' Progress Tyrant, that can unconditionally copy spells. And while not requiring spells to be cast from exile, it does has a hard once per turn limit and can only copy artifact, instant, or sorcery. So no creatures, no enchantments. And while both are respectively very good copier, I think Nalfashni is better at being very explosive. For once, the haste, which allows creatures to immediately attack and no restriction on how many times this can trigger in a turn, can really create explosive plays. Jin-Gitaxias is definitely better in accumulating value over time since the artifacts it copies will stick around. And so far, I've been playing Nalfashni in my Maelstrom Wanderer deck, and I think it tends to draw less hate than something like Jin Gitaxias, which, of course, comes with a stacks ability on top of it. I often run away with the game when I get a free copy of any of my big bomb spells. Extra turn spells, of course. Copy that, you get another extra turn. That's just big value. Genesis Ultimatum, Creative Technique, Blatant Thievery, or maybe a hasty extra copy of Pathbreaker Ibex. Yeah, it's once you get to copy stuff, even just for one turn, this can go really, really crazy. And now, coming for the runner-up in the second place. And again, I don't think you will see this coming. I have Spectacular Showdown in the second place here. So, I was really interested in this card when it got spoiled, and while I thought it can end games at times, it's probably gonna be a somewhat sort of meme card to troll the table a bit. What I didn't expect is how often this won me the game. And what a way to win too. You can basically watch your opponent just slaughter each other with double strike. Then when it gets to your turn, you just need to finish whatever's left. And your creatures also got the double strike, so usually it's no problem at all. And remember, since your opponents were forced to attack and potentially kill each other, it's very common that you're left with probably one opponent and a bunch of tapped creatures since they had to attack. So there's some timing to figure out on when to best cast this so it doesn't backfire. Also, you can optimize this with some setup so that you're within reach of finishing the game after all the slaughtering happens. And what I think makes this better than, say, a card like Insurrection is that you're not immediately open to sort of a big counterattack right after casting this. On the contrary, this is actually a way more controlled method of finishing the game. And yeah, I've always been thinking of the goad mechanic actually as more of a control archetype, probably combat control, right? And finally, I think I mentioned this already, but giving all these goaded creatures double strike is huge. I think this gives you that extra reach needed to more easily close out games, and something that a lot of those other big finishers like Insurrection doesn't have. And finally, in the first place, we got a card that costs 18 cents. It's Eltural Survivors. You didn't see this one coming, right? So, talking about cards that won me games, my top performer of this list is Eltural Survivors. I know, not the most hyped card out there, but I was really surprised myself how good this card has been for me. So first, it's in some ways similar to Sardian Avenger. This card scales as the game progresses. It probably doesn't scale as explosively as Sardian Avenger, but it's much more stable and reliable, since there are always lands and they tend to not go away, unless, of course, if your pod is evil and plays Armageddon. I'm kidding, do play Armageddon. So if you cast this on curve, it will be around 4 to 5 power usually, and towards the end of the game, it can easily have 8 to 12 power or even more. And now, just raw power is all good, of course, but what makes this really shine is the two keywords: Trample and Myriad. Trample makes sure that all that scale power can actually do us something good. On the other hand, Myriad, while yes, it triples your damage output and takes down all your opponents, I found that the most valuable thing out of Myriad is the sort of pseudo-evasion. So see, unlike Sardian Avenger, Eltural Survivors doesn't have first strike. So while it might have a super large power, it can easily die in combat, and you don't want it to die, right? So with Myriad, however, you just need a single opponent whom you can attack safely and let Myriad clones attack the players with the heavier defense. Almost always there's at least one player that's somewhat open. However, now, what if there's no one open? So this is another design that Eltural Survivors share with Sardian Avenger. Ultra Survivor has a base power of 0, so it only gains that huge power while it's attacking. This means, again, red evasion enablers such as Subira, Break Through the Line, Access Tunnel, and so on and so on and so on, will easily make Ultra Survivor unblockable, granting it a super safe attack and chunking down your opponents. One thing to note though, unfortunately, unlike Sardian Avenger, Ultra Survivor's power buff doesn't trigger on attack, so it won't stack up with multiple combats, unfortunately, but I think that's fair enough. So there was this one time I had this insanely explosive play with Ultra Survivor during the very end game that actually won me the game. And I was actually pretty behind that whole game, and another player was threatening a win on his next turn. So at that time, all I had was Lightning Greaves and a Pathmaker Initiate already out. So pretty good setup. That means I can give a creature haste and make it unblockable. So I started my turn by actually top decking Ultra Survivors. I wasn't sure at first what to do, but I realized I might have a line here to actually win the game out of nowhere. So I played Ultra Survivors, made it unblockable, right? Using the Pathmaker Initiate, and then put the Greaves on to protect it. However, I have another card in hand, and it's Curse Mirror. So I played the Curse Mirror, copying my Ultra Survivors, so now I have 2 of them. I attack with both of my Ultra Survivor, each having myriads, so each opponent gets 2 of these each. And they had I don't know, everyone had a lot of lands, so they have 12 or so power with Trample. And well, that did not quite make it, and my opponents did have a few blockers out. I did have another trick. I played Savage Beating, giving all those 6 Ultra Survivors double strike, and another combat phase after. Boom! That absolutely sealed the deal. That was a ton of damage, all at once to all of my opponents. So sure, there was a lot of support cards involved, but hey, they played really nicely with this one single creature. And yeah, who needs combo, right? You just go beat them up. So, those were the 20 new cards from 2022 that were my top performers, ordered by which exceeded my expectations the most. I'm sure there are many cards that I missed, but hey, we just got so many cards this year, and it's hard to even keep track. As I'm recording this, Phyrexia All Will Be One is already being spoiled. But, so, what do you think of my list? Did any of those cards perform for you as well? I would absolutely love to hear what were your top performers in 2022, or which cards surprised you the most. Let me know in the comments. And with that, I wish you happy holidays, and thank you so much for watching. It really means a lot to me. And here's to 2023. Let's hope it will be a great year for Magic and Commander.